everybody. Welcome to the Too Much Music podcast. I'm Alison.
And I am Greg.
And we are happy to welcome you back. And at the end of our last episode, I made a pretty incendiary remark. I said something along the lines of making art and making money from that art are essentially mutually exclusive today.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
I'm shocked you would say something incendiary, and I'm shocked that it would be that.
Yeah.
How dare you?
It'd be super anti-capitalist. The reason I say that is tied up in all kinds of very big picture stuff, obviously, that's going on. But it's been kind of true in my mind for some time, and I've struggled with it a little bit, but that has always felt essentially self-evident to me since I was young. And I've always been surprised that other people didn't seem to feel that way. And I'm still surprised by it, frankly, because the economic system that we live in doesn't give a rat's ass about art at all in any way, right? That's not what it's for. You know, love it or hate it, that is not what it's here for. And you can find little pathways, right, for yourself, which is what people do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in general, I find that putting my attention toward digging out those little rat hole pathways to make some money from music is just much harder than making money in a different way and, than being able to make music on my own time. And I'm lucky, both of us are lucky to have set up a situation for ourselves where we have time and mental energy, to be able to do that. What do you think about that? How do you feel about that? You're somebody who's made money in the past from music. I really haven't. It's just never been something I've tried to do. I've never really even wanted to try. How did that feel? Does that feel like art making to you? What's the relationship in your mind?
Well, okay. Two things. I was going to say that first, that we do have to separate. There are industries that depend on music and that pay for music or music making in some form. So those industries, you're building product, is how I would say it. You're building a product for an audience, whoever that may be. Even if the audience are stakeholders, but you have an audience, you have a client, you're building a product, and you're bringing skills to do that. A church musician is right? That's a great example, and they're everywhere. So you need to show up. People expect and want to have a service delivered.
And you can't just play any kind of music as a church musician. Like you have very specific expectations for what you're doing.
A clear set of restrictive, you have a set of limitations that you must follow in order to hold that job for the most part. So that's, you're doing a workaday thing. And then there are those who want to do music in a more casual way, more where they have full control or most control. Basically they can decide there's no audience for this and I don't care and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Or there's a certain audience and I'm going to deliver something to them, but I don't expect really to make any money, and therefore there's no pressure and I can deliver what I want when I want, that kind of thing. So I think those are two different worlds. That's all I was going to say. And I have done both. The workaday world, it's got its things, it's got its challenges, but at the end of the day, within those restrictions that you have, there is creativity that comes, and it's a lot of fun to be on teams with people to try and solve those creative problems. It's important and maybe interesting to note that, at least my experience, and I think those are my colleagues, like friends who are musicians who do this as well, you can do that with a shitty music product and not care. So in other words, you can be very inventive, you can put all of yourself into something. And I say shitty, what I might mean is something that you don't creatively find yourself invested in. I mean, we have a friend who's a writer who works on TV shows. And, a lot of what he does is he's working on a team and he's working for people who are showrunners, right? Or a showrunner who's deciding how these things go. And he is given a task, like the plot starts here. We need it to get here in 45 minutes, make it happen.
Yeah.
And he's an inventive writer and he can do it. But when he's left to his own devices, he's going to do things in a very, very, very different way. Not even just a different style, just a very different approach to what he believes, what feels right to him. Anyway, I think we all have to deal with this sort of thing if we're going to be in there doing it. So there is creativity and fun that comes in it. It's all I was trying to say. And it is not anything like just having a blank canvas and sitting in a studio like this, which I've designed for my own, my own amusement, and deciding what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. That's a totally different deal. And I can afford, I would say this, sorry, I'll shut up. But I would say I can afford to build the studio with inefficiencies, knowing that the trade-off is I get creative agency and I get to faff about for a long period of time to find something or to discover an instrument or whatever. I get these instruments behind me, in fact, they don't have presets, which just means that you can't do that if you're working for someone who has a deadline and has product. But here I can do that, and I can enjoy that process and form a relationship with the instrument, etc. So there are advantages to not having those kinds of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if there's one thread through this conversation in the last so far, it's, creating an amount of freedom for yourself. And I think, that's something we've both obviously placed a lot of weight on in our lives. And, in terms of its relationship to the outside world, sometimes I feel just so isolated from how other people do things, because I'm not doing the things that you're supposed to do if you're a songwriter or if you're an electronic musician or whatever. I just don't I don't do those things. And I'm not actually proud of that, but there's something that keeps me from that path. And this is something I think about all the time. Why do I choose to go this way? This way, which is very disconnected in a lot of ways. And the reason has been that I'm not interested in connecting to the larger, music industry. I have been in it and around it quite a lot in some very different ways. And I find it disgusting, Frank. Like, I think it's a disgusting industry. I think
so what do you find disgusting about it?
Well, I think it is, it depends on which pieces of it you're talking about. If you're talking about, the typical old school LA stuff, I mean, it is just absolutely a rat king of old school bro culture. And they all have this vague thing that they flip their hand around and talk about the artist, but none of them give a shit about the artist. They talk about that. They use that word to describe Britney Spears, right? Because she's the person on the fucking poster, right? And then there is these teams of people teaming and doing all this amazing work, for only one reason. And, it's obvious what that reason is. And that to me is not something, go ahead. It's an industry. People want to make money. We live in a capitalistic system. Good for you. I'm not interested in being part of that. The streaming industries came in very aware of that system and figured out
it. They've made it all better.
Right, they've made it all better. They saved it. They stole it. They stole those industries. They give those people enough crumbs that they can still keep operating, sort of. But they're barely. I mean, the major labels are so much less relevant than they used to be in terms of new music, but they have all the old shit. So they're rich, rich as kings. And,
in fact, they're making more money now than they ever have.
That's right, and that'll last for a while.
Until everybody dies out who gives a shit about Rod Stewart.
Rod Stewart. Nice example. Yeah, I mean, so I think I've spoken enough in the past about Spotify and the streaming music services that I probably don't need to go. And probably most people listening are aware.
So let me ask you this. And again, we're taking twists and turns. That's how we do in part 2. Duh. Twist and turns. That's my French right there. That's all I got. But there it is. Okay. My question for you is, do you think as a musician you should be able to make a living doing what you want to do?
I don't. Okay. I actually don't. And I think here's what I would say about all of it. Like, the underlying thing that I really think, that I've come to think, I did not always think this, is that
brace yourself, dear listener.
No one is entitled to make a living doing anything. And the truth is, we have created a structure in this world that is so beyond fucked up for actual human beings, that whatever you think should or shouldn't happen and whatever you think you should or shouldn't be able to do, it doesn't matter. Because until that structure gets fixed up a little bit, probably ripped out and replaced with something better over time, good luck to you. You're just going to be trying to go through those little mice holes to find, and that's great. Like, that's what people will do. They'll find their own little spot, no matter what the culture around them is. And that's what they should do. And whatever feels right to you is great. So I'm not trying to say anybody trying to make money off of music is doing it wrong. They're not. I'm trying to say that the system in place is not really going to allow for much of that. And until that system changes, all you're doing is getting crumbs anyway. That's how I feel about it. Is that dark? You're
talking about a revolution. Hey,
Greg hates the Beatles, people.
I don't even know if those are the right words, but we'll just go with it. No, you are. You're talking about a revolution that's needed, and we are in the United States. That's important because we have a global platform here. I don't know if you realized how important YouTube is and podcasting can be, but there are people listening in all the far corners of the world.
It's being inspired.
We're talking about first world problems, and we're talking about United States. Things are different in Europe, and I don't mean better. I just mean different. They may be better. I'm not there. I can't speak to it. But that's important that I certainly agree with you that our culture does not give any fucks about art. For all the, you remember in the startup that we did that we would look at all these different studies and data that would talk about, that would people self-reporting about how important music was to them, right? Like how much they valued it. And that was every goddamn music startup, people would say, well, music is the foundation. It's the bedrock of everybody's life. It's the soundtrack to your life.
Soundtrack to your life. That's right.
It's so important. We've got to, and like that would be the foundation of them pitching then the next music app, streaming service. They're all dead now. But anyway, that was the promise. And the truth is it's not right. That's not right. And of course we've been involved in the arts, in the fine arts, the nonprofit arts as well. And there's a whole thing with that where people believe, and they have to believe, they're mission driven, and they believe that the arts can change people's lives. They can, I believe.
And I do too. I believe that.
You do too, yeah.
Yeah, to be clear, I do believe that. I also believe that, as I said earlier, I admire people for trying, and I try. But I also think that we're in a situation that is almost beyond saving at this point.
Here's a thought, because I want to circle back to our discussion of the power of big tech, and I don't want to call them social platforms anymore, but basically feeds.
We can think about Spotify and those sorts of platforms as, more of a danger on the music side. And I think Spotify is emblematic to me of a service that has created such a frictionless experience for people. And that's, let's underlying all of these big tech platforms, that's one of the primary user experience goals of these.
Lean back experience.
Right. The lean back experience is what they used to call it, but it is about eliminating friction so that the user, and be clear that that's what they think of you, the user will continue on the path that they want to set for you. It's, that's what user interface design is all about. That's what user experience is all about. It is.
And at this point, content, I don't know how much you're aware of this. We haven't talked about this, but content now for Spotify is they've been feeding in AI generated music for some time, and they're doing this paying royalties to anyone. So
right. So they want to see how much they can get away with on that front, and it's turning out.
It's proving out.
It's a lot. They can get away with a lot because what they've created is a situation, and I think this applies to music. I think it applies to almost everything, touching this big tech world. It turns out that when you have no friction, when you can take this and just go from thing to thing to thing, you literally have a smooth screen. That's all you're touching, right? I'm stroking my phone with 2 fingers, just for everyone who's listening.
Pornographic. It's a little disturbing. I don't know. We're a little.
But no, seriously, it is a frictionless device, and everything on it is designed to be frictionless. The reason frictionlessness is a problem is that we learn things from friction. We learn things when we bump up against something that isn't what we expect, and we have to figure out how to deal with it, right? Let's take music, for example. If you never have to stop and think about what you want to hear next, there's nowhere for your brain to latch on. There's nowhere for your brain to actually do anything. So you might feel like you're enjoying things, but you're not engaged with it actually at all. It's just an endless loop for you. And it's backgrounded.
Now I want to take this and point it directly at you as a creator. Get ready. You don't know where I'm going with this, I guarantee. No, it's good. So one of the ways in which this happens is we get trained, all of us do, we get trained on what to expect when we hear music. So already by definition, this happened in the radio days, the good old radio days, where we would hear songs, oh, baby, baby, hold me close, whatever, okay? And as those things were happening, we were trained that that's what music is. People talk about it that way. They talk about this is what music is, and they're referring to things that they know or they've heard before. Now, we take someone like Alison here, who writes songs not about human relationships. That's not typically, I happen to know your oeuvre. I happen to know your output. And your tendency is to write about the human condition. I think in far more interesting and universal, just much more interesting ways, more of like a novelistic sort of way. You write about people and characters and worlds that you create that are far more interesting. I don't know what to say than sugar baby, honey, hold me. Okay. But that immediately, because we've been trained and Spotify will continue to, so people's worlds, what I'm trying to say is people's worlds get smaller and smaller and smaller. They don't know that's happening. They're not aware that that's going on.
Right.
And that leaves someone like you who's writing about alien abduction, and or whatever, or someone who believes they're being, or whatever. You're writing very interesting stories and good songs, but they're not holding me tight, baby, baby. So
yeah, they're not really very playlistable at all, I would say.
That's it. You're immediately removed. You don't have a place in the quote unquote genre world, and that's a whole nother damn topic, but there's no such thing as musical genres, folks. That's a whole invention of the record labels to sell more stuff to niche people. But anyway, Alison gets stuck out in the cold because the Spotify playlist, and no AI would decide, unless you told it to do this. It wouldn't decide to do it on its own because it doesn't make a lot of sense, but yet it's part of the human experience. And we we should want to branch out and reach out. So I guess I'm saying you're disadvantaged by the way that we're trained.
Yeah.
It's real difficult. It happens occasionally, but another quick example would be you can watch a great movie or a movie with a great score, and maybe it's a horror movie. And if the composer is allowed the freedom and they can pull it off, they could create a totally different kind of sound that's horrifying than you've heard before. But that's tough to do, and most people don't want to go there. They will fire you and hire someone else. This happened with Blade Runner. Yeah.
The new one.
Sorry, the new Blade Runner. Thank you. Whatever, 2048.
Yeah,
3.
what year? I don't remember.
Anyway, that happened where like people were scared. Don't move away from the Vangelis score that was so iconic. Right. Let's get the experts in who can just give us that again. Anyway.
Well, to be fair to Spotify, I'm not on it, which is why I'm really not playlistable. You and I both removed our music from those services for this exact reason, because they're not going to help us. They're not for us.
We're taking Spotify down by removing our shit.
Yeah, that's right. I'm taking a stand. No, but you know what? To get somewhere a little more positive, because I actually think there are really incredible things happening on this front, and I think you and I are very much not alone in thinking this way.
Yeah.
I am, as you know, pretty active on Mastodon, which is what I tell my real life friends is it's my nerd social network. It's
what?
It's like basically nerds only allowed. And, I say that a little tongue in cheek because the people on it are people who, for whatever reason, are not satisfied with Facebook, with Twitter, with whatever. Like, they're people who want to have an interactive life online, but they don't want to do it in these other ways. And people have different reasons for that. But I think oftentimes their reasons are sort of what we discussed in the last podcast episode, that they're pretty disgusted by big tech. And so there's a pretty big electronic music community on Mastodon.
I do need to pause you and just say the deal with Mastodon is this, and it's real simple. It can be more complex, but the super simple is there is no advertising. There are no feeds. There are no central servers. There's no, the reason it works without bending your mind because it really just is people mingling. And that makes it frustrating to people who are used to the feeds, but it's liberating to those who want to. Sorry.
Yeah, it's decentralized is the word that people use, and it has no ownership is the point. So there's no one making real money from Mastodon or the Fediverse in general, which is what it's part of. So it kind of feels like the old internet before a business model was figured out for the internet, and it's very refreshing. And it's mostly older people for that reason, people who remember what the internet was like. Yeah, older nerds, and I am starting to see some younger people come on. But the electronic music community that I have found there, this is the first time I've ever really been involved in an online community. And I'm really just starting to get to know people and, starting to participate. I've veered away from this stuff, frankly, my whole life. But I am finding that there are a lot of people there who have these same thoughts and feelings that we've been expressing, about big tech and about how it affects them and their creativity and their music making. And, they all have their own ways of thinking about it, of parsing it, and of dealing with it. And it's really refreshing and amazing to see all of the cool things that people are doing on that front. Just yesterday, I went to, so there's a trying to make this short. There was a radio station, an online radio station of only music from the Fediverse, which is the larger world that Mastodon is part of, this decentralized social media network. And it was a really cool radio station, started, I don't know, a couple, 3 years ago I don't know how long ago. But the person who ran it, eventually got burned out. It was really just a one-person effort. And so they shut it down. And everybody was sad. But what happened from that shutting down was people really came out of the woodwork and said, you know what, I really valued this and I want to do something. And so lots of little projects, music community projects and radio projects and playlist projects and website projects have kind of sprung out of this community. And so now Radio Free Fedi is doing this old radio station that shut down is doing and they've done this in the past, they're doing an online streaming music festival through the month of July called Radio Free Fedi Fest. Say that again. You say it.
Radio Free Fedi Fest.
Yeah, nice work. RFFF. And it's just, people sign up and they are going to stream, live from their studios or wherever they are. There's probably one every few days throughout the month of July. So it's not a massive thing. But I happened to pop into one yesterday and it was like one of the best experiences I've had online in ages. It made me want to keep doing it, keep going, because this one happened to be. And again, I didn't really plan for this, but I saw it in my Mastodon feed, and I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to do one of these performances at the end of July. I was like, I want to see this, and I need to get in there. I need to get out of my bubble and into somebody else's bubble. So I went, and there was a really fun chat. People were having a blast. It happened to be not a live performance, but someone playing a mixtape that they made that was amazing. It was shockingly good. There was so much good music on it. All made by people, way outside of the major label system, way outside of normal distribution. These are all Fediverse people who kind of feel the same way we do about music making. And there was so much high quality stuff. It really struck me how many people there are out there who, like us, have worked very hard to be able to make music and really value it for what it can bring to humanity and to ourselves, and also feel very disconnected from that larger system and are doing something about that. And I think that, it's not like this is a lot of people, but to me that almost makes it more important, that it's a smallish community which is very human-sized, right? I can know most of the people who are involved in this, at least online. They don't live here, but I find that very inspiring. And I don't know. It's hard to find inspiring stuff these days.
It is. There are very few places where that's even possible online. In person, there might be, but you still have to probably get to some niche communities. I wonder how much, to what extent, we were kind of ragging on that's a 90s word. We were ragging on all the big tech toxicity and trying to build sanctuary from it in our own lives and in studios. We were doing that in our last episode. And here, we're talking about building community. I wonder to what extent, because I'm older than you, child of the 70s, grew up in the 80s, and I remember I was out in the Midwest, so there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't integrated into culture, let me say it that way. And so, but I remember you still had to find communities. It was tough to do. You had to build communities like you're talking about in the Fediverse. Mixtapes we called them mixtapes because that's how people did it.
Yeah.
People would give each other mixtapes to hear music at all that wasn't on the radio. The reason I'm saying that is I wonder, like, if this is just how different this really is, with the exception of being online and the removal of the business model. It seems like that's super key.
Well, it's important too to know its relationship with like outsider culture and with things like, punk rock culture and zine culture, right? These are all things that, a 40, 50-year-old person would know about from the first time around. And so we turn, I think, to these ideas because they were already and always anti-capital, right? They were... Yeah. Because that was already a problem, right, in the 80s. It wasn't this is what I mean when I say, we're not actually in a new situation. We're actually in a heightened, super terrifying version of a very old, not very old, but a pretty old situation. A situation that's been in place since I was born, for sure, in 1981. So it makes sense that we would kind of turn to these, to these older forms. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, zines in particular were... that's just, I think, a perfect example of something that was just people saying, you know what, screw all of this. Like, I'm just going to write this on a piece of paper and give it to someone. I mean, it doesn't get more personal and simple and silly than that. But how powerful is that, especially today, when everything you type on your computer, unless you're a Linux user, is fucking being surveilled. Like, literally, Microsoft is taking screenshots of what you... of your text files.
Or your precious phone. We just want a frictionless phone. No.
Listener, now Greg is stroking his phone.
I had to just join the party.
It's fun.
I want, so it's very tempting to look back at the 80s, in my case, and think, oh, but there weren't big roadblocks. We didn't have the idea that anybody could become famous. But the truth of that is very, 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 very different, because the gatekeepers were sitting on Madison Avenue in Sony and BMG and Capitol Records or whatever. And they were, Herb Alpert and his friends at the A&R or whatever were deciding who was going to be marketable and whatnot. And they were building boy bands. Obviously, you experienced that. Yeah, growing up, that they would just build these. Anyway, my point is that I'm not so sure it was a whole lot different because the challenges were physical, not digital. So maybe the solutions can be. I'm curious to know what people think about this. I hope we can get some conversation about this going on Mastodon and or wherever
wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah, because I'm curious to know if people kind of feel like maybe it's not that different of a revolution that's needed, or a resistance. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Like it's basically the same old thing, just in a different format.
It's just harder now because people have no brains left. So,
That's the trick there. And that's what our first part 1 was all about, was keeping your brain intact. The promise when I was a kid, the promise of the internet, which would of course mean that I could live somewhere like I do, like on the side of a mountain where no one is, and I have fiber internet, and it's crazy. It's crazy because I'm remote. And I can do this from my studio. I can stream live on YouTube, which I do. And YouTube is a whole thing. We should talk about it some more, but because that's a whole toxic thing. But the point is, I can build videos. I can put my music out, and that was the promise of the tech, and it is true. Mm-hmm. Sort of.
Just turns out there was a
price.
Yeah, there was a price for that promise fulfillment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I also am very interested to keep having conversations about that, and about whether, I think that's a really good question, whether those old tools are. Like, think about things like community organizing. I mean, community organizing is something people know how to do, right? There are tried and true techniques for doing it. And certainly today in the United States, at least, there are a lot of people really thinking about how to do that. But, one of the things that I see that's so, talk about toxic, people are doing like political organizing on Facebook, and they're sending me links to Google Forms, to sign up for a protest. And I'm like, sorry guys, I'm not putting my name on this Google form. Like, call me paranoid, call me whatever you want. No fucking thank you. I'm not getting on that list. Like, organize somewhere else, and I will be with you, and I will help you do that. And I've even made that offer to community organizers in my local area, political organizers, and I've said, look, if you're doing it this way, and I think this is the primary, like this speaks to the primary problem that people are having getting out of this cycle. I said, if you're doing it this way, I'm not going to participate, but I will help you do it another way, and I know how. And they just drop off. They won't consider that. And it's because it's the same reason fucking Jon Stewart, is all on these ridiculous social media platforms that he is railing against all day, every day. And he knows they're fucking bad for people. And yet that's where the people are. And at the end of the day, he's an entertainer, and he needs those numbers to keep doing what he's doing. And I think that problem right there is the problem that has to be solved.
So you see it as a problem that has to be solved, not a struggle that will always be there.
I guess. I mean, maybe there's some of both, but I do think that's a solvable problem. I think, that's what is inspiring to me about something like Mastodon. There are a lot of people on Mastodon. There aren't as many people as there are on Facebook or Twitter, but there are a lot of people. And my experience has been that those people are engaged with each other deeply. And, if I put some music on Mastodon, like, people will actually talk to me about it and listen to it. When I was using Instagram for a little while, a few years back, I was just shouting into the void. I mean, there was nothing. And that's clearly everyone's experience. Like, that's what everyone says. They're just scraping for anybody to pay attention to them because the algorithm does what it does. And that's, so I do think it is a problem that can be solved, but I don't think it's easy. And I think I have personally had a very hard time convincing people that it's even a problem.
What I focus on myself is the fact that removing the algorithms from my life has left my life silent, quiet, and building a sanctuary of music making tools that I can build relationships with without interruption, without an input, has left the space silent. That's why I call it a sanctuary. And then I can start to think about what it is I actually want to say and what I want to do. Now, where it goes is a whole other thing. As you say, there are resistance communities, we'll call them, that may be interested and may not be. But I think it's another interesting question, and maybe this is for next episode, is what do you make when you have no client, when you have silence, and when you're not being inundated by outside. Right.
You're not trying to get the record deal. You're not
you're also not being influenced by what you hear everybody else doing. This probably should be the next podcast, because we've talked a bit about this in the past, but the fact that gear and the gear selling process, the gear economy, thank you, that is deeply influencing what people are doing, whether they know it or not. We talked about Fortet. Dare I bring up that name again?
No, let's not talk about him.
The reason I'm bringing that up again is to say that person is not going to be making what they're making without the interface that was designed by somebody else and the gear that, I'm saying, like, that's not balance.
I'm just going to say one word, and it's Ableton.
Sure. Ableton. Exactly. Yeah. That is you can say that's a tool. Of course it's a tool. You can say you can build a relationship with Ableton, but Ableton is forcing you as a creator into doing things a specific way that you may or may not really be choosing and may not know.
Yeah. It might be what you want. It really might. And that really is fine. And I speak from experience. I have been an Ableton user pretty seriously. It might be what you want, but if you don't recognize that it's influencing you, I think that's a problem.
That's it. It may be like, yeah, exactly. Maybe frictionless. It may feel good, but if you don't know that that's what you're doing, you're a victim.
Oh my God, talk about frictionless. Ableton, we were talking about this the other day privately, like Ableton is the frictionless music software, and that's what I loved about it. That's why I went with it for a while. But boy, it turns out I really do think problems and friction are one of the things that generate, at least for me, some of the most creative thinking out there.
I couldn't agree more. I've been building a series recently of I call them Let's Patch videos on the CS-30 over here, which is it's the biggest, baddest monosynth that Yamaha ever made in an analog form. And in fact, it's like the CS-80 on steroids, just happens to be one voice. It's a miracle of engineering. It's not a digital instrument. It's just wires in there. It's a miracle. And I've been building these patch videos. And the thing is, for all the reasons we just said, you can't do what you on software, what you can do on this. You just can't. You'll never, ever, ever get there. I'm not saying you can't clone a sound. I'm not saying AI couldn't clone that sound. I'm saying that you couldn't create the way you can on that. And again, that can be something you like or don't like, but you can do that physically here. You can develop a relationship with that process. It can become part of what you're doing and what you're making out of coming from a place of silence and centeredness and internal looking. I value all those things. And if you don't know that you're not doing that, I think that's dangerous. I think there's a cost.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's stop it there for today. This has been a really fun conversation. And yeah, if you're listening or if you're watching and you want to talk about these things, I hope you will reach out in whatever way it makes sense to you. Jump on Mastodon, make yourself an account. Don't worry about which server you pick. That's my one piece of advice. Just pick one. Get on there. Yep. Yeah, and we would love to talk to you about these things. So it's been fun. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And we will see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Until next time.